I'm Heather, I'm 32 years old, and 3 weeks ago, at my father's retirement party, he did something that made me decide to erase myself from my family permanently. Picture this. A glittering country club ballroom filled with 200 guests in designer suits and cocktail dresses, champagne flowing like water, and my father standing on stage with a microphone in his hand, introducing his family one person at a time. When he got to me, he smiled that smile I'd seen 1,000 times, the one that looked warm to everyone else but cut like glass to me. "And this is my daughter Heather," he said. "No degree, no future, just a freeloader living off the family." 200 people laughed. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I simply smiled, raised my champagne glass and said, "Cheers. This is the last time any of you will ever see me." Then I walked out. The room went completely silent. What happened next? That's what I'm here to tell you. Before I continue, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely want to know how this story ends. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now let me take you back 12 years to the day I was forced to leave college. The Evans family of Fairfield, Connecticut, that was how people knew us. Upper middle class, respectable, polished from the outside. My father, Richard Evans, was the CEO of a mid-sized logistics company. We lived in a 6-bedroom colonial on 2 acres, drove a Mercedes S-Class, and belonged to one of the most exclusive country clubs in the county. From the outside we looked perfect. But perfection was only what people saw from the street. My mother died when I was 8. Cancer. Quick and brutal. I barely remember her face without looking at photographs, but I remember her hands. Soft, always reaching for mine. 2 years later, my father remarried Linda. She came with a son from her previous marriage, Marcus, who was 3 years older than me. Within months, they weren't just part of our family. They became the family. Became furniture. Not in some dramatic movie-style way. There were no locked rooms, no Cinderella-style abuse, no screaming matches every night. It was subtler than that. You understand. Marcus got praised for his grades. Mine were barely acknowledged. Marcus got a brand new car when he turned 16. I got his hand-me-down. Marcus was called the future of my father's company. I was simply, also there. My father never hit me. He never screamed at me. In fact, that was part of what made it so difficult to explain. How do you tell people you're being erased when nobody is openly hurting you? How do you prove that being constantly overlooked can hurt just as deeply as being openly rejected? I learned early that in my family, Marcus was the investment, and I was the expense. I was expected to be grateful for whatever was left over. And for years I was. I worked hard, stayed quiet, and convinced myself that if I achieved enough, earned enough, and proved myself enough, someone would eventually look at me and realize I had been standing there all along. But the truth was, they had seen me. They simply never believed I deserved the same place at the table. And 12 years later, at my father's retirement party, when he stood in front of 200 people and reduced his own daughter to a punchline, something inside me finally went completely still. I realized I had spent my entire life waiting for a family that had never actually made room for me. So I raised my glass, smiled, and walked away. And this time I didn't plan on coming back. He just looked through me as if I were a window, as if he was always trying to see past me to something more important. But there was one person who truly saw me. My grandmother, Margaret Evans, my father's mother. She called me every Sunday and asked about my classes, my friends, and my dreams. She would say things like, "You remind me of myself at your age, Heather. Underestimated, but I see you." When she died, she left me something no one else in the family knew about. But I'm getting ahead of myself. In that family, I learned how to become invisible. What I didn't know then was that one day, my invisibility would become my greatest weapon. The day my future was decided for me, I was 20 years old. I was a sophomore at Yale, majoring in business with a 3.8 GPA. I had plans, dreams, and a scholarship application sitting on my desk for a summer program in London. Then, one Wednesday, my father called me home. "Family meeting," he said. Those 2 words had never meant anything good. I found him in his study, sitting behind a mahogany desk in a leather chair, with walls lined with awards and certificates. Linda stood beside him, one hand resting on his shoulder, the two of them looking united before I'd even heard what they wanted. "Heather," my father began without looking up from the papers in front of him, "we need to make some sacrifices as a family." My stomach tightened. Marcus has been accepted into the Wharton MBA program. It's an incredible opportunity. My heart rate barely changed. I already knew where this was going. "We can't afford both your tuition and his program," he continued. "So we've decided that you'll take a break from school. Just for now. Marcus's career will benefit the whole family." Linda nodded, her voice sweet as honey. "A girl doesn't need an MBA to have a good life, Heather. You'll find a nice husband someday. That's what really matters." I sat there frozen. Not because I was surprised. I'd spent 12 years learning not to be surprised. I was frozen because some small, foolish part of me had still hoped that maybe, just once, they would choose me. "You said you'd support my education," I heard myself say. "You promised Mom before she died." My father's jaw tightened. "Circumstances change. When the company stabilizes, I'll make it up to you." He never did. What I discovered later, through a cousin's careless slip of the tongue, was that there had been plenty of money. They simply chose not to spend it on me. I didn't argue that day. I just nodded. But inside I made a promise to myself. This would be the last time I ever let someone else decide my worth. I moved to Boston with $2,000 in savings and a suitcase full of clothes that no longer fit the life I was leaving behind. My first apartment was a 400-square-foot studio above a laundromat in Allston. The radiator clanked all night, and the walls were so thin I could hear my neighbor's television through them. I ate ramen for dinner and day-old bagels from the cafe where I worked mornings. But here's the thing about rock bottom. Once you've reached it, you realize you can stop being afraid of falling. I got a job as an administrative assistant at a small logistics company. Entry-level minimum wage, but it came with benefits. The owner, a gruff man named Walter Barnes, saw something in me that my family never had. "You've got a brain, Heather," he told me one day. "Use it." So I did. I stayed late. I learned every system and every process. I took free online courses at night. Supply chain management, operations, business fundamentals. IT open course where became my college. I didn't call home. I didn't ask my father for a single dollar. I built my education the hard way, one late night, one paycheck, and one lesson at a time. And while my family believed I had simply disappeared after dropping out of college, I was quietly becoming someone they would never recognize. For the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to prove that I deserved a place at their table. I was building my own table, and I had no idea yet who would eventually be begging for a seat. When my father's secretary sent me a birthday card with a $50 check from the family, I tore it up and threw it away. 4 years after leaving Connecticut, I had saved enough money to start my own consulting firm, Meridian Consulting, LLC. At first it was just me, a laptop, and a rented desk in a co-working space. I kept my name off everything public. No LinkedIn profile. No press releases. No interviews. All business went through the company name and my lawyer. Why the secrecy? 'Cause I knew my family. If they discovered I was succeeding, they would either find a way to take credit for it or try to tear it down. Some people build empires to prove their worth. I built mine in silence because silence was the only language my family had ever taught me. My grandmother, Margaret, died 2 years ago when I was 30. I flew back to Connecticut for the funeral, sat in the back pew, and watched my father deliver a eulogy about a remarkable woman who had dedicated her life to her family. The irony was so thick I could practically taste it. At the reception I kept to myself. No one seemed to notice I was there, which was exactly how I wanted it. But 3 days later, I received a phone call from a lawyer I'd never heard of. "Miss Evans, I represent your grandmother's separate estate," the woman said. "She established a trust fund in your name 8 years ago, with explicit instructions that no other family member be informed of its existence." I nearly dropped my phone. The trust contained $800,000. She left a letter for you as well, Eleanor continued. Would you like me to read it? I said yes, even though my voice barely sounded like my own. My dearest Heather, Eleanor began. I know what they did to you. I know about the tuition, the promises, all of it. I argued with your father until I had no words left. He wouldn't listen. He never does. This money is yours. No strings. No conditions. Use it to build the life you deserve, the life they tried to take from you. Remember what I always told you. Don't let anyone convince you that you're not worthy. When they finally see your worth, it will be too late for them. Believe in you. I always have. All my love, Grandma Margaret. I used part of that money to expand Meridian Consulting. The rest I kept as insurance for a day I hoped would never come, but always knew might. That day came 3 weeks ago. Let me tell you what Meridian Consulting looks like today. We have 15 employees, $4 million in annual revenue, and offices in Boston's Back Bay. I wear Cartier now. Not because I need to impress anyone, but because I earned every piece myself. We specialize in logistics optimization, helping companies streamline supply chains, reduce costs, and improve efficiency. It isn't glamorous work, but it's profitable, and I'm very good at it. Here's the part that would make you laugh if it weren't so painfully ironic. One of our biggest clients is Evans Logistics, my father's company. They signed a 5-year service contract with us 3 years ago. We handle their route optimization, warehouse management, consulting, and carrier negotiations. Our work has saved them millions in operational costs. My father has no idea that the company responsible for so much of his success belongs to the daughter he once called worthless. All communications go through my team. Every contract is signed by my CFO, Daniel Reeves. And the few times Richard Evans has praised Meridian Consulting at industry events, he's been praising his own daughter's work without even knowing it. The daughter he told everyone had no future. 3 weeks ago, I received a formal invitation to his retirement party. Gold embossed lettering. Richard Evans requests the pleasure of your company. I almost threw it away. Almost. Then I remembered my grandmother's letter. When they finally see your worth, it will be too late for them. And suddenly, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I was going to attend that party. I was going to stand in the room where my father had spent years pretending I was invisible. And I was going to let him introduce his family one person at a time. I just wanted to see what he would say when he finally got to me. But then I thought about Grandma Margaret, about 12 years of silence, every broken promise, and every door that had been closed in my face. I RSVP'd yes. Not because I wanted reconciliation and not because I believed anything had changed. I went because I knew, with absolute certainty, that my father would eventually do something unforgivable. And when he did, I wanted to be there to say goodbye on my own terms. I just didn't know how right I would be. The Fairfield Country Club hadn't changed in 30 years. The same Swarovski chandeliers hung from the ceiling, the same pretentious valet service greeted arriving guests, and the same crowd of old money and new ambition moved through the ballroom, pretending they belonged together. I wore a simple, elegant black Valentino dress, my grandmother's pearl earrings, a Cartier watch, and an Hermès Birkin bag. Everything I owned I had bought myself. That mattered to me far more than the labels ever could. Linda intercepted me at the entrance. She had aged, but her smile hadn't. It was still that perfect mask of warmth hiding something much colder underneath. Her Chanel dress was immaculate, her diamonds were enormous, and her eyes quickly inventoried my outfit before she spoke. "Heather, you came." Her tone suggested that my arrival was both a pleasant surprise and a minor inconvenience. "Your father wasn't sure you'd have something appropriate to wear." Smiled. How thoughtful of him to worry. Inside, 200 guests mingled beneath the crystal lights, the who's who of Connecticut business. Bankers, lawyers, executives, politicians, and people who had spent decades making sure everyone knew exactly how important they were. I recognized several faces from my father's old dinner parties. None of them recognized me. Marcus swept past with a model thin blonde on his arm without even glancing in my direction, telling someone about his vision for the company's future. Classic Marcus. All confidence, no substance. I found my assigned seat. Table 14, tucked into the far corner near the service entrance, surrounded by friends of the family I'd never met. Not the family table. Not even close. I wasn't surprised, but I made a mental note of it. A waiter offered me a glass of Dom Perignon, because apparently nothing but the best would do for Richard Evans's big night. Accepted it. Across the room I caught my father's eye. He nodded once, a dismissal disguised as acknowledgement, then turned back to his real guests. The evening was only beginning, and I already had a front row seat to my family's contempt. Over the years, I'd learned that the best information often came from staying quiet and keeping your ears open. From my corner table I watched and listened. The acoustics in that ballroom carried conversations much farther than people realized. My father was holding court near the bar, surrounded by business associates. I heard him talking about operational restructuring and strategic partnerships, standard executive language designed to sound impressive without actually saying much. Then I heard him say, "Meridian Consulting has been transformative for us. They're the backbone of our operations now." He was speaking to a silver-haired man I recognized as a major shipping executive. The man nodded. "I've been trying to get a meeting with them for months. Very private operation. Do you know who's behind it?" My father shrugged. "I've never met them personally. Everything goes through their legal team and account managers. But honestly, I don't care who they are as long as they keep delivering results." I took a sip of champagne to hide my smile. That exact moment my phone buzzed. It was a text from Daniel, my CFO. "Contract renewal documents from Evans Logistics arrived today. They want another 5 years. Waiting on your decision." I typed back, "I'll have an answer by the end of the week." What my father didn't know, what nobody in that ballroom knew, was that Meridian Consulting's contract with Evans Logistics was coming up for renewal. If we walked away, they would lose 40% of their operational efficiency almost overnight. In logistics, that wasn't a minor inconvenience. Could cripple a company. I still hadn't decided what I was going to do. Part of me wanted to keep the professional relationship separate from the personal toxicity. Business was business, after all. But as I watched my father bask in praise for the success of a company that depended heavily on work I had built, I felt something inside me shift. For years, I had quietly made his company stronger while he told the world I was worthless. Tonight, I realized I no longer had to choose between being professional and protecting myself. The decision was mine. The contract was mine. And for the first time in my life, the power was mine too. Tonight would determine everything. I needed a refill on my champagne. Or maybe I just needed to move, to shake off the strange energy building in my chest. At the bar, I ran into the extended family firing squad. Aunt Susan, Linda's younger sister, spotted me first. Her face went from surprise to pity to condescension in about half a second. "Heather. Oh my goodness. I almost didn't recognize you." Her eyes traveled slowly up and down my dress. "You look well. Still up in Boston doing whatever it is you do." "Consulting," I said. "Supply chain management." "Oh, how nice." The way she said it made it sound as if I'd just told her I collected bottle caps. Then she tilted her head. "Are you seeing anyone? Your father mentioned you're still single. 32, right? Time flies." Before I could answer, Uncle David joined us. "Richard was just telling me you're still figuring things out. Nothing wrong with being a late bloomer, I suppose. Not everyone is meant for traditional success." And suddenly, I understood exactly what had happened. My father had briefed them. He had given them talking points about the family's disappointment and established the narrative before I had even arrived. "Richard said you had some emotional difficulties after leaving school," Aunt Susan added, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "Mental health issues. So brave of you to come tonight despite everything." My grip tightened around the champagne glass. Not because I was hurt. I had been hurt by my family for so long that pain had become an old language. No, I was tightening my grip because I was stunned by the sheer audacity of it. I appreciate your concern, I said, keeping my voice perfectly steady. But I'm doing very well, actually. Better than I've ever been. They exchanged a glance. The kind of glance that said, "Poor thing doesn't even realize how far she's fallen." I excused myself before I said something I would regret. But by then, a plan had already begun forming in my mind. Cold, clear, and inevitable. Marcus found me on the terrace a few minutes later, looking out over the golf course. The September air was cool, and the first stars were beginning to appear. "Well, well." His voice came from behind me, heavy with contempt. "The prodigal daughter." I didn't turn around. "Marcus." He stepped beside me, close enough for me to smell his cologne. "Tom Ford, probably another gift from our father. Dad's about to give his speech. I wanted to make sure you weren't planning any dramatic scenes." "Why would I do that?" "Because you've always been jealous." He said it like it was an established fact, something everyone had known for years. "The way you stormed off after the tuition decision. The way you disappeared to Boston like some wounded animal. You've never gotten over it." I finally turned and looked at my stepbrother. He was standing there in a $5,000 suit, wearing a Rolex, with his perfectly styled hair and the confidence of a man who had never once been forced to question whether he belonged. "Is that what you tell yourself?" Yes. For the first time that evening, his smile disappeared. "What?" "That I was jealous. That I ran away because I couldn't handle losing to you." His jaw tightened. "You did run away." "No, Marcus. I left." He stared at me, clearly unused to hearing me speak with certainty. "There's a difference." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You really think you're something now, don't you?" I looked through the glass doors at the ballroom, at my father surrounded by the people who had spent 12 years believing the story he told them about me. "No," I said quietly. "I don't think I'm something now. I know exactly what I am." Marcus folded his arms. "And what's that?" I took one last sip of champagne and set the glass on the terrace railing. "The person your entire company can't function without." His expression changed. Just slightly. But I saw it. The first crack in the story they'd built about me. And then I walked back into the ballroom because my father's speech was about to begin, and I had a feeling that before the night was over, everyone in that room was going to learn exactly who I was. His eyes hardened. "I heard you started some kind of company up there, playing businesswoman." He gave a short, cruel laugh. "How long until it fails?" 6 months. A year. Then you'll come crawling back, begging Dad for help. "I won't." "You will. You always do. You're weak, Heather. You always have been." I could have told him everything right then. I could have told him about Meridian Consulting, about the 15 employees, the millions in revenue, and the contract that kept his precious company running efficiently. I could have told him that much of Evan's logistics success was built on the work of the sister he had spent 12 years dismissing. But I didn't. Some revelations need the right stage. "You know what, Marcus?" said. "You can believe whatever makes you feel better." I started to walk past him, then stopped. "But I promise you this, after tonight, you're going to wish you'd treated me differently." His laugh followed me back into the ballroom. Dismissive, arrogant, completely certain of his own superiority. He had no idea what was coming. None of them did. A few minutes later, the ballroom lights dimmed. A spotlight hit the stage, and my father climbed the steps to thunderous applause. The conquering hero of Connecticut logistics was taking his final bow. "Thank you." "Thank you," he said. His voice carrying that practiced warmth he'd perfected over decades. 40 years in this business. It's been one hell of a ride. Laughter filled the room, followed by another wave of applause. He began his speech by thanking his business partners, employees, mentors, God, and luck, taking credit for nearly everything else. Then came the family segment. I couldn't have done any of this without my incredible wife, Linda. He gestured toward her table. 30 years of putting up with my late nights and business trips. You're a saint. More applause. Linda dabbed at her eyes, perfectly on cue. And my son Marcus, who will be taking over as CEO in January. The room erupted again. Marcus stood, raised his glass, and smiled like the future had already been handed to him. I watched my father beam with pride. Then he paused. His eyes scanned the room, and for the first time that evening, they landed directly on me. "And finally," he said, "my daughter Heather." The room grew quieter. I felt every head turn in my direction. My father smiled, the same smile I'd seen 1,000 times, warm enough for strangers and sharp enough to cut me. "Heather has always been different." Few people laughed nervously. I didn't move. "She struggled with direction after leaving college. She's had a difficult time finding her place in the world." My father's voice remained calm, almost affectionate. "But she's here tonight, and that means something." The pity began before he even finished speaking. I could feel it moving through the room. "So, Heather," he continued, raising his glass toward me, "we're proud of you for making the effort to come. And who knows? Maybe someday you'll find your own path." The room applauded politely. I sat perfectly still. My father had just reduced 12 years of building a company, surviving alone, and creating a life from nothing into a sentimental little story about a lost daughter who had finally shown up to her father's retirement party. And then, suddenly, I understood. He had given me the stage. He had placed 200 witnesses in the room. He had just introduced me to everyone as the family disappointment. All I had to do now was tell them who I really was. Richard beamed with pride. The future of Evans Logistics. I couldn't be prouder. A standing ovation erupted. Marcus rose and waved, soaking in the attention like a man who had already inherited the entire empire. He looked like corporate royalty. Then my father's eyes found me, and something in his expression changed. Something colder, something mean. And of course my daughter Heather. The spotlight swung toward my table. I felt 200 pairs of eyes turn in my direction. My father smiled that familiar smile, the one that looked warm to everyone else and cut straight through me. No degree, no real career, just freeloading off the family. He paused for comedic effect. "But hey, at least she showed up tonight. Maybe someday she'll find a rich husband to take care of her." The ballroom erupted in laughter. Real laughter. The kind that comes from people who think they're part of a harmless joke, never realizing they're watching cruelty dressed up as entertainment. I sat perfectly still. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I didn't look away. I simply waited for the laughter to fade. And then I stood. The room went silent as I rose to my feet. I could feel every eye on me, some curious, some pitying, and some already preparing to witness a breakdown. The unstable daughter finally cracking under her father's harmless little joke. I picked up my champagne glass slowly and deliberately. My father's smile faltered just slightly. He hadn't expected me to react. I never had before. I was supposed to sit there and absorb the humiliation the way I always had. Instead, I raised my glass toward him. "Congratulations on your retirement, Dad." My voice was clear, steady, and loud enough for the microphone to carry it across the room. 40 years in business. Quite an achievement. Pause. The silence grew heavier. "You taught me a lot about hard work, about sacrifice, and about exactly what kind of loyalty family can expect from you." The ballroom became completely still. I could hear the faint clink of someone's ice 3 tables away. I lifted my champagne glass higher. "So here's to you." Then I looked directly at my father. "Cheers. This is the last time any of you will ever see me." I set the glass down without taking a sip. Then I picked up my Birkin bag, turned, and walked toward the exit. My heels clicked against the hardwood floor, each step echoing through the cavernous ballroom. I didn't run. I didn't hurry. I simply walked with my spine straight and my head held high. Behind me there was only silence. And for the first time in my entire life, I wasn't the one being left behind. I was the one leaving. Complete, devastating silence. Someone gasped. Someone else whispered something I couldn't make out, But mostly there was only the echo of my footsteps and 200 people trying to process what they had just witnessed. The daughter who was supposed to be broken had just walked out on her own terms. I pushed through the double doors and stepped into the cool night air. And for the first time in 12 years I could breathe. I was almost to my car, a black Tesla Model S with a custom plate, when I heard footsteps behind me. Heather! Heather, stop right there. Linda's voice was shrill and furious. Kept walking. What do you think you're doing? She demanded. Then she grabbed my arm and spun me around. Her face was red beneath the country club lights, her carefully constructed composure finally cracking. Do you have any idea what you just did? You humiliated your father in front of everyone. I looked down at her hand gripping my arm until she finally let go. I humiliated him. I asked quietly. I think you have that backward. My father appeared behind her, his face dark with anger. 200 guests were probably watching from the ballroom windows, and he knew it. I could see him calculating the audience, the reputation, the damage. Get back inside, he ordered, his voice low and dangerous. Apologize. Now. No. The word hung in the air between us. My father stared at me as if I had just spoken a language he didn't understand. This isn't a negotiation, Heather. I'm your father. I'm telling you. You're telling me what? Cut him off. I had never done that before in my life. The shock on his face was almost worth everything. That I should go back inside and apologize for responding to a public insult. That I should stand in front of 200 people and pretend you didn't just call me a freeloader with no future. Or maybe you're telling me that I'm still the same 20-year-old girl who sat in your study while you decided Marcus's future mattered more than mine. His expression tightened. Don't bring up the past. You brought up the past the moment you made me the punchline of your retirement speech. Linda stepped between us. Heather, you're being emotional. I almost laughed. No, Linda. I'm being very calm. That's what seems to be upsetting everyone. My father took one step toward me. You think you're better than us now? No, I said. I think I finally understand that I don't need your permission to exist. He stared at me. For the first time that night, I saw something beneath the anger. Fear. Not fear of losing me. Fear of losing control of the story. You walk away from this family and don't expect to come back, he said. I smiled sadly. Dad, I left 12 years ago. You just never noticed. Then I turned toward my car. Behind me, Linda said something furious, and my father said my name one more time. I didn't stop. I opened the driver's door, got inside, and closed it. The moment the door shut, the world went quiet. I sat there with both hands on the steering wheel, staring through the windshield at the glowing entrance of the country club. My family was still standing there. My father, Linda, the people who had spent 12 years telling everyone I was a failure. And for the first time, I didn't feel the urge to prove them wrong. I had already done that. I started the engine and drove away. I didn't know it yet, but by the time I reached Boston, my phone would be filled with missed calls, messages, and one email that would change everything. That I should go back in there and let you keep using me as your punchline. That I should smile while you tell 200 people I'm worthless. My father's face hardened. It was a joke. I shook my head. No. It was the truth of how you see me. And I'm done pretending otherwise. I opened my car door. My father stepped forward. If you leave now, you're done. Do you understand me? No more family. No more support. Nothing. I almost laughed. Dad, you cut me off 12 years ago. You just never had the courage to say it out loud. I slid into the driver's seat. Tonight, I'm saying it for both of us. I started the engine. Goodbye. And I drove away. About 20 minutes outside Fairfield, I pulled into a rest stop and sat in my car with the engine idling, both hands still gripping the steering wheel. For a long moment, I did nothing but breathe. Then I looked at the camera and let myself step out of the story for a moment. I know some of you watching this have been through something similar. Maybe not at a retirement party and maybe not in front of 200 witnesses, but you know what it feels like to be the family disappointment, the person they whisper about, the person whose success they refuse to see. If you've ever sat at a family gathering while someone made you the punchline, if you've ever smiled through pain because making a scene would only give them another reason to blame you, or if you've ever loved people who made you feel invisible, then this part of the story is for you. If any of this resonates with you, tell me your story in the comments, or simply let me know you're here. Because honestly, knowing I'm not alone in this means more than you can imagine. And if you want to know what happened next, trust me, this is where everything changes. Make sure you're subscribed and turn on notifications, because what my father discovered in the weeks after that party would force him to confront exactly how wrong he had been about me. Now back to the story. The morning after the party, I woke up in my Boston apartment feeling lighter than I had in years. But I knew it wasn't over. Families like mine don't let go easily. They control the narrative. They rewrite the facts. They turn the person who finally speaks up into the villain. And I knew my family would do exactly that. I just didn't expect them to move so quickly. The campaign began with text messages. Not from my father. He was far too proud for that. But from cousins, aunts, distant relatives, and people I hadn't spoken to in years who suddenly became deeply concerned about my mental health. Heather, I heard about the party. Your dad says you're struggling. Do you need help? Susan told me you had some kind of breakdown. We're all worried about you, sweetie. Your father loves you. He just wants what's best for you. Maybe you should apologize and come home. The narrative was already being written. Poor Heather. Unstable. Jealous. Emotional. Some kind of episode at the party. Richard Ivans, the patient, loving father, doing his best to deal with a troubled daughter. I didn't respond to a single message. Then, on Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang. The number was from Connecticut, and I didn't recognize it, but I answered anyway. Miss Ivans, this is James Crawford. I'm a partner at Evans Logistics. His voice was polished and professional. I'm calling on behalf of Richard. He'd like to discuss mending fences. I almost smiled. Really? Between you and me, there's been some concerning chatter about your connection to certain business partners. Probably nothing, but Richard thought it would be wise to clear the air. I went cold. Rumors. Something like that. What kind of rumors? Asked, keeping my voice neutral. There may have been some confusion regarding our consulting partners at Meridian Consulting. Someone thought they had seen you at one of their offices once. I'm sure it's a misunderstanding. My mind started racing. How had they found out? Who had seen me? When? I'm not sure what you're referring to, I said carefully. But please tell my father I have nothing to discuss with him. I ended the call. They were fishing. They had no idea how much I knew, but they were getting closer. Much closer than I had expected. It was time to stop waiting and start acting. While I was fielding concerned messages in Boston, my father was facing a very different kind of crisis in Connecticut. I learned about it much later, but that morning, Richard Ivans walked into what should have been a routine quarterly board meeting. Instead, his CFO looked like he'd seen a ghost. We have a problem with Meridian Consulting, the CFO said, sliding a folder across the mahogany table. Richard frowned. What kind of problem? Their contract is up for renewal in 6 months. And they haven't responded to our extension offer. Richard stared at him. Then send another offer. We did. Increase the terms if you have to. The CFO hesitated. We've tried 3 times. The room went quiet. Richard leaned back in his chair. Then try a 4th. We already did. His CFO opened the folder and placed 3 printed emails on the table. They haven't replied to any of them. Richard's expression darkened. Who is handling the account? Their legal team. Then call the legal team. We did. And the CFO looked down at the folder. They said the decision is with the owner. Richard's jaw tightened. Then find the owner. The CFO hesitated again. That's the problem. Richard stared at him. What problem? The CFO slowly turned the folder around. We don't know who owns Meridian Consulting. For the first time in 40 years, my father had a problem he couldn't solve by making a phone call, giving an order, or using his family name. He had built his entire company around the assumption that he knew who mattered and who didn't. And somewhere in Boston, the person holding the contract that kept his company running was the daughter he had publicly called a freeloader. He just didn't know it yet. But he was about to find out. Their legal team keeps saying the contract is under review. Then call their executives directly. We've tried that too. The CFO shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Sir, Meridian Consulting is extremely private. No one meets with their leadership. Everything goes through intermediaries. Richard's frown deepened. We've been working with them for 3 years. Someone must have met with them. No, sir. It's all been virtual meetings, legal representatives, and account managers. No one at this company has ever met the actual owners. A long silence settled over the boardroom. The CFO glanced down at the folder before continuing. If they walk away from us, we lose 40% of our operational efficiency almost overnight. It would take at least 18 months to find a replacement, and that's an optimistic estimate in this market. I know what it means, Richard snapped. He stared at the folder, but something else was nagging at him. Timing. The sudden silence. The contract review happening immediately after his retirement party. And then a thought surfaced, one he dismissed almost as quickly as it appeared. Well, it couldn't be. Find out who owns that company, he said. The CFO blinked. Sir. Meridian Consulting. I want the ownership structure. Every name, every holding company, every investor, every person connected to it. I want to know who is behind that company. We've tried to trace it before. The ownership is shielded through a private structure. Richard's eyes narrowed. Then try harder. The CFO nodded, but he didn't move. There is one thing. Richard looked up. What? Our internal records show the founder's name is Heather Ivins. The room went completely still. Richard stared at him. That's impossible. That's what the records say. Heather Ivins. He said the name slowly, as if repeating it might make it belong to someone else. Yes, sir. Richard pushed back from the table. There are thousands of people named Heather Ivins. Not with the same corporate registration history, sir. The CFO opened another file. This Heather Ivins was born in Connecticut, attended UConn University, moved to Boston 12 years ago, and founded Meridian Consulting 4 years later. Richard's face lost its color. No. The CFO said nothing. Richard reached for the file with hands that had suddenly become unsteady. There it was. Name. My date of birth. My education. My company. My life. The daughter he had told 200 people had no degree, no career, and no future. The daughter he had called a freeloader in front of his entire professional circle. The daughter whose company had been quietly saving his business millions of dollars every year. His eyes moved to the final page. Who is the current CEO? He asked, though he already knew the answer. The CFO looked at him. Heather Ivins. Richard sat completely still. For 12 years, he had told himself I had failed. He had repeated it so often that it had become a family fact. But now the truth was sitting in front of him in black and white. I hadn't failed. I had disappeared. And while he was busy telling the world I had no future, I had quietly built the company his future depended on. Richard's phone began to ring. He glanced at the screen. It was a number from Boston. He almost didn't answer. Then he did. Mr. Ivins. A woman's voice said. This is Eleanor Smith, legal counsel for Meridian Consulting. We received your request for information regarding the ownership structure. Richard's throat tightened. Yes. I'm calling to inform you that your contract renewal is officially under review. I understand. And I should make you aware of something else. Richard's hand tightened around the phone. What? There was a pause. The final decision will be made personally by the owner. Richard already knew. He just couldn't bring himself to say the name. And who is that? He asked anyway. The answer came quietly. Heather Ivins. The line went silent. And for the first time in my father's life, he understood exactly what it felt like to be the person standing on the outside of a locked door. He said, "I don't care what it takes. I want a name by the end of the week." What Richard didn't know, what he was about to discover, was that the name he was looking for was already on his family tree. Thursday evening my phone rang. Linda. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. Heather, sweetheart. Her voice was honey and sugar. The performance of a lifetime. I've been so worried about you. Have you? Of course. Your family. That's what family does. She laughed softly as if we were sharing a private joke. Listen, about the party, your father feels terrible. He didn't mean what he said. You know how he is. He was nervous, trying to be funny. He said I had no future and no worth in front of 200 people. She paused, recalibrating. He exaggerates when he's anxious. You know that. Why don't you come home this weekend? We could have dinner. Just the four of us. Clear the air. Start fresh. I could picture her sitting in that pristine living room, rehearsing this call, planning exactly which buttons to push. The concerned mother, the peacemaker, the bridge between troubled daughter and wounded father. Does Dad want to apologize? Yes. There was a slight hesitation. He wants to move forward. That's what matters, isn't it? So, no apology. Heather, don't be difficult. We're trying to help you. Help me. Now. I laughed. Linda, you've spent 22 years making sure I knew I wasn't really part of this family. Now you're calling to help me. Why? Another pause. Longer this time. I think we both know there's more going on here than just family drama, she said, her voice dropping its warmth. Whatever you're planning, and I know you're planning something, it would be better for everyone if you just came home and talked this through. No. I hung up before she could respond. They knew something. They just didn't know how much to be afraid of yet. The next morning, I drove to Eleanor Smith's office in downtown Boston. Eleanor had been my grandmother's lawyer, and since the trust fund had become mine, her office was sleek and efficient. Glass and steel, Boston skyline views, the kind of place where serious business happened. "I've been expecting you," she said when I walked in. "I assume this is about Ivan's Logistics. They're investigating Meridian, trying to find out who owns it." Eleanor nodded, unsurprised. Richard said, "I don't care what it takes. I want a name by the end of the week." What Richard didn't know, what he was about to discover, was that the name he was looking for was already on his family tree. Thursday evening my phone rang. Linda. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. Heather, sweetheart. Her voice was honey and sugar, the performance of a lifetime. I've been so worried about you. Have you? Of course. Your family. That's what family does. She laughed softly, as if we were sharing a private joke. Listen, about the party, your father feels terrible. He didn't mean what he said. You know how he is. He was nervous, trying to be funny. He said I had no future and no worth in front of 200 people. He exaggerates when he's anxious. You know that. Linda paused, recalibrating. Why don't you come home this weekend? We could have dinner. Just the four of us. Clear the air. Start fresh. I could picture her sitting in that pristine living room, rehearsing this call, planning exactly which buttons to push. The concerned mother, the peacemaker, the bridge between troubled daughter and wounded father. Does Dad want to apologize? Yes. A slight hesitation. He wants to move forward. That's what matters, isn't it? So, no apology. Heather, don't be difficult. We're trying to help you. Help me. Now. I laughed. Linda, you've spent 22 years making sure I knew I wasn't really part of this family. Now you're calling to help me. Why? Another pause. Longer this time. I think we both know there's more going on here than just family drama, she said, her voice dropping its warmth. Whatever you're planning, and I know you're planning something, it would be better for everyone if you just came home and talked this through. No. I hung up before she could respond. They knew something. They just didn't know how much to be afraid of yet. The next morning, I drove to Eleanor Smith's office in downtown Boston. Eleanor had been my grandmother's lawyer, and since the trust fund had become mine, her office was sleek and efficient. Glass and steel, Boston skyline views, the kind of place where serious business happened. "I've been expecting you," she said when I walked in. "I assume this is about Ivan's Logistics. They're investigating Meridian, trying to find out who owns it." Eleanor nodded, unsurprised. "Your anonymity was always going to be temporary. The question is, how do you want this to unfold?" She spread documents across her desk. The Meridian contract with Ivan's Logistics, every clause, every renewal term, every exit provision, the trust fund documents, and the company incorporation papers. "Your contract includes a standard 30-day termination notice," Eleanor said, pointing to the relevant section. "You can end the agreement for any reason. No penalties, no legal exposure. And my grandmother's trust is completely separate from the Ivans family estate, legally unimpeachable. Richard has no claim to any of it, even if he tried to contest." She looked at me over her glasses. "Margaret made sure of that." I stared at the papers. Everything was in order. Everything was legal. Every T crossed, every I dotted. What did my grandmother say about all this when she set up the trust? Eleanor smiled sadly. She said, "One day, Heather is going to need leverage, and when that day comes, I want her to have it." I felt tears prick at my eyes. Grandmother Margaret, protecting me even from the grave. "She also said something else," Eleanor added. "Tell her not to be cruel about it. Just be honest. Sometimes the truth is punishment enough." He nodded. The truth. It was. Then that afternoon I sat down with Daniel Reeves, my CFO, in Meridian's conference room. Daniel had been with me since year 2. He knew everything about my family, about Ivan's Logistics, about why I'd kept my name off the paperwork. He was loyal, competent, and the closest thing I had to a true ally. "They want to renew the contract," he said, scrolling through his tablet. 5 more years, actually. They increased the terms by 12%. They're nervous. They should be. I pulled up the financial projections on the conference room screen. Numbers don't lie, and these numbers told a devastating story. If we walked away, Ivan's Logistics would lose 40% of its operational efficiency within 60 days. In logistics, that's not a dip. That's a free fall. Their clients would start looking elsewhere. Their margins would collapse. Daniel nodded. Marcus just took over as CEO. If this hits on his watch, his reputation is finished before he starts. We sat with that for a moment. It felt surreal, holding so much power over people who had spent decades making me feel powerless. "What do you want to do?" Daniel asked. I'd been thinking about this for days, about Grandma Margaret's words, about revenge versus truth, about what kind of person I wanted to be. "Draft the termination letter," I said finally. 30-day notice per the contract terms. No malice, no accusations, just business. And the reason? Strategic repositioning. That's all they need to know officially. Pause. "But I'm also going to write a personal letter to my father. Separate envelope. He deserves to know exactly who he's been depending on and exactly why that's ending." Daniel nodded. "When do you want to send it?" "Monday. First thing. No more waiting. No more hiding." I spent all of Sunday writing that letter. Not the official termination notice. Daniel handled that. The professional language, the legal provisions, the clinical restructuring of client portfolio explanation that would go in the file. I wrote the personal letter, the truth. I went through 7 drafts. The first was too angry. Pages of accusations. Every hurt catalogued and condemned. The second was too cold. The third was too desperate. The final version was simple, clean, and factual. "Dear Dad, you said I had no future. You told 200 people I was worthless. I want you to know something. The company you called the backbone of Ivan's Logistics, Meridian Consulting, is mine. Built it. Own it. For 3 years, the daughter you dismissed has been a cornerstone of your business. I'm ending our contract not as revenge, but as a boundary. My grandmother left me a trust fund you never knew about. She saw what you couldn't, that I was worth investing in. Everything I have, I built myself with her faith and without your support. I don't need you to apologize. I don't need you to understand. I just need you to know that I am not what you said I was. I never was. Don't contact me again. Heather Margaret Evans. I included my middle name deliberately, the name I'd added 3 years ago in honor of the only person in my family who had believed in me. I also included a photocopy of the Meridian Incorporation papers, with my name clearly listed as the sole owner. I read the letter 3 times, checked for typos, checked for excessive emotion, and found none, just the truth. Sometimes I think that's the most devastating weapon of all. Monday, 9 a.m. courier confirmation. The package had arrived at Ivan's Logistics headquarters. Someone named Patricia Chan had signed for it, Richard's executive assistant. I remembered her from childhood. I sat in my office watching my phone and waiting. At 10:15 a.m., I had a missed call from Richard Ivans. At 10:17, another. At 10:23, a missed call from Marcus Ivans. At 10:31, one from Linda Ivans. At 10:45, another from Richard. At 11:02, a text from Richard. Call me now. At 11:15, a text from Marcus. What the hell is this? Olas. At 11:34, Linda texted. Heather, this is not funny. Pick up your phone. By noon, I had 12 missed calls, 8 text messages, and 2 voicemails I didn't bother listening to. I didn't respond to any of them. I had waited 12 years for this moment. They could wait a few more hours. At 2 p.m., my assistant knocked on my door. Miss Ivans, there's a family who says they need to see you immediately. They're in the lobby. So, they had driven to Boston. 5 hours of traffic and panic just to confront me in person. I took a deep breath, checked my reflection in the window, and straightened my blazer. Send them to conference room B, I said. I'll be there in 5 minutes. This was it. The conversation I'd imagined 1,000 times. The confrontation I'd prepared for without knowing when it would come. I thought of Grandma Margaret, her letter, and her faith in me. Don't be cruel, she'd said. Just be honest. I stood up, smoothed my skirt, and walked toward the conference room. Time to be honest. Conference room B had glass walls. I'd chosen it deliberately. My 15 employees could see inside, though they couldn't hear. Witnesses. Not to humiliate anyone, but to ensure the meeting stayed civil. Richard, Linda, and Marcus stood clustered near the window, looking out at the Boston skyline. They had never expected to see this view from my perspective, from my domain, my territory. My father turned when I entered. His face was gray, older than I'd ever seen him look. Heather. His voice cracked on my name. What is this? Hello, Dad. Linda. Marcus. I took a seat at the head of the conference table, calm and professional. I assume you received my letter. Your letter. Marcus stepped forward, jabbing his finger toward me. You can't just. This isn't. Sit down, Marcus. My voice was quiet but firm. I won't discuss anything with you, yelling across the room. He looked at my father uncertainly. Richard nodded sharply, and they sat. For a long moment no one spoke. Finally Richard leaned forward. This is all some kind of misunderstanding. What part? Meridian Consulting. You can't possibly own a company like that. You didn't. I did. I slid a folder across the table. Company registration, tax filings, client list. 3 years ago your company signed a contract with mine. You praised my work at industry events. You called us transformative. You just didn't know you were praising me. Linda's face had gone pale. But you don't have a degree. You were just a what, Linda? A disappointment. A failure. I shook my head. I was a 20-year-old who was told to sacrifice her future. I built something anyway. Silence. My father stared at the documents like they might burst into flames if he looked at them long enough. Okay. Richard's voice was strained, the mask of corporate composure cracking. I apologize. I apologize about the party. Is that what you want to hear? Sorry. Now, can we talk about the contract? You're sorry because you need something from me. That's not an apology. For God's sake, Heather. Marcus slammed his palm on the table. Do you know what happens if you pull this contract? 20% of our workforce could be gone because of your petty revenge. It's not revenge. It's a business decision. He was standing now, the veins in his neck visible. You've been planning this for years, waiting to destroy us. This is sick. I planned nothing. Kept my voice level. I built a company. Your company chose to become dependent on mine. That's not my fault. You could have told us, Linda interjected, her voice high and strained. You could have said something. When? When you told me I didn't need an education because I'd find a husband. When you spread rumors that I had mental health problems. She had no answer. I turned to my father. You want to know the worst part, Dad? I would have kept the contract going. I wasn't planning any of this. But then you stood in front of 200 people and told them I was worthless, that I had no future. Pause. You chose this, not me. Richard's jaw worked. For a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw something like recognition in his eyes, like he finally understood what he'd done. Then it was gone. What do you want? He asked flatly. Nothing you can give me. There must be something. You're not listening. I don't want anything from you. I never did. I just want you to know the truth. Fine. Richard's voice went cold. The vulnerability was gone, replaced by the steel I'd known my whole life. If that's how you want to play this, you walk away from this family. Done. No inheritance, nothing. I almost laughed. Dad, you cut me off when I was 20 years old. What inheritance? I could make things very difficult for you. Have connections. Lawyers. On what grounds? I leaned forward. Every document is legal. Every contract was signed in good faith. There's nothing here you can sue me for, and we both know it. He glared at me. Don't be so sure. Actually, I am sure because my lawyer, who was also Grandma Margaret's lawyer, has already reviewed every possible angle. I let that sink in. You remember Eleanor Smith? Margaret used her specifically because she knew you'd try something like this someday. Linda gasped. Margaret knew about all of this. She left me a trust fund, $800,000, specifically structured so you couldn't touch it. I pulled out a photocopy of the trust document. She knew exactly what kind of family she raised. That's why she protected me from it. Richard's face went from red to white. She had no right. She had every right. It was her money. Understood. This meeting is over. Heather, we're done. I've said everything I came to say. I walked toward the door, then paused. One more thing. If you contact me again, calls, texts showing up at my office, I will release every email, every document, every record of how this family has treated me. All of it is legal. All of it is backed up. And all of it would make a very interesting story for the business press. Open the door. The receptionist will show you out. I stood in the doorway, watching them gather themselves. 3 people who had spent my entire life making me feel small now looked very small themselves. My father rose slowly, like an old man suddenly aware of his age. Linda clutched her handbag like a shield. Marcus stared at me with something new in his eyes. Not contempt anymore, but fear. This isn't over, Marcus said. Yes, it is. Meant it. Every word. I spent 12 years building a life you tried to convince me I couldn't have. I did it without your help, without your approval, without your permission, and I'll continue to do it without any of you in my life. Linda's lower lip trembled, the performance of motherly concern. Heather, please. We're family. We share blood, Linda. That's all we share. I held the door open wider. I'm not asking for an apology. I'm not asking for reconciliation. I'm setting a boundary. Don't contact me again. Don't mention me to your friends, your colleagues, anyone. Just let me go. Richard stopped in front of me. For a moment we just looked at each other. Father and daughter, strangers who happened to share a last name. You really hate us that much? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. No, Dad. I don't hate you. That's what you don't understand. I met his eyes steadily. I just don't need you anymore. And that's something you'll have to learn to live with. He had no response to that. They walked out through the lobby, past my employees, who carefully pretended not to watch. The glass doors closed behind them. I went back to my desk, opened my laptop and got back to work. Okay, let me pause here again. If you're still watching, first of all, thank you. This isn't easy to tell, and knowing you're listening means more than you know. If you think this is where the story ends, it's not. The fallout from that meeting rippled out further than I expected. When I sent that termination letter, I thought I was just setting a boundary, protecting my peace, and walking away from people who had hurt me. I didn't anticipate what would happen to Ivan's logistics, or to my father's reputation, or to the family secrets that would come spilling out once people started talking. Here's my ask. If this story has moved you, if it's made you think about your own family, your own boundaries, or your own worth, hit that like button. Helps more than you know. And subscribe if you haven't already. Turn on notifications, because the ending of this story is complicated. It's messy, and it taught me something about revenge that I didn't expect. I'd also love to hear from you. Drop a comment telling me. Have you ever had to walk away from family? Did it feel like freedom or like grief? Or maybe both. I've read every comment on my previous stories, and they've helped me feel less alone in this. So please share your thoughts. Now back to the story. 1 week after that confrontation in my office, I received a phone call from someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Someone who had information that changed everything I thought I knew about my family and about why they really treated me the way they did. Let me tell you about that call. The caller was my Uncle Robert, my father's younger brother. Robert had always been the black sheep of the Ivans family. An artist, a dreamer, the one who didn't go into business. I hadn't seen him since my mother's funeral and hadn't spoken to him in over a decade. Heather. His voice was older, rougher. I heard what happened at the party and at Richard's office. Word travels fast. Small community. He paused. Listen, there's something you should know. Something I should have told you years ago, but I was too much of a coward. I sat down slowly. I'm listening. When your father said the family couldn't afford both your tuition and Marcus's, that was a lie. I know. I figured that out. No, you don't understand. It wasn't just that there was money available. There was a specific fund. Your mother set it up before she died for your education. Enough to cover a full 4 years at any school in the country. My heart stopped. Richard drained it. Used it for Marcus's MBA. Then told you there was no money. Robert's voice cracked. Your mother wanted you to have choices, Heather. Richard stole them. The room tilted. I gripped the edge of my desk. Why didn't you tell me? Because I was afraid of Richard. We all were. Robert exhaled. Margaret, your grandmother, found out. That's why she set up the trust for you. She couldn't get your mother's money back, but she could make sure Richard didn't take anything else. I thought about Grandma Margaret's letter. I know what they did to you. She knew all along. Why are you telling me now? Yes. Because it's time the truth came out. All of it. He wasn't done. 2 months after I terminated the Meridian contract, the consequences became public. I wasn't trying to monitor what happened to Ivan's logistics. Honestly, I was trying to move on. But in the Connecticut business community, news travels fast, especially bad news. The company announced a 20% workforce reduction. 70 employees laid off right before the holidays. The press release blamed market conditions and strategic restructuring, but everyone knew the real story. Their biggest consulting partner had walked away, and they couldn't recover. Marcus, barely 3 months into his role as CEO, was already being questioned by the board. His vision for the future was crumbling under the weight of his father's bridge burning. Richard came out of retirement to help manage the crisis. The triumphant exit he'd planned, the legacy he'd built, was unraveling, but the real damage was to their reputation. Word spread not from me. Kept my mouth shut. But 200 people had watched my father humiliate his daughter at that party. And when those same people heard that the daughter was actually his company's most important business partner, the whispers started. Did you hear about Richard Ivans? He mocked his own daughter. Turns out she was keeping his company afloat. I always thought there was something off about that family. In Connecticut business circles, reputation is everything, and Richard's was crumbling. A former colleague told me that at a recent industry dinner, Richard sat alone. No one wanted to be associated with the man who'd publicly disowned the daughter who'd secretly been his backbone. I didn't feel triumphant hearing this. I didn't feel satisfied. I just felt tired. Grandma Margaret had been right. Sometimes the truth is punishment enough. I didn't have to do anything else. The truth did it all by itself. 6 months later, I sat in a therapist's office in Beacon Hill. Not because I was falling apart, but because I was finally ready to put myself back together. You don't seem like someone who needs therapy, Dr. Patel said during our first session. Everyone needs therapy, I replied. I'm just finally letting myself admit it. We talked about my family, about the years of invisibility, about the burden of building success in silence, and about the strange grief of cutting ties with people who were supposed to love me. Do you regret what you did? She asked. No, and I meant it. I regret that it had to happen, but I don't regret protecting myself. Outside of therapy, my life was good. Better than good. Meridian was thriving. We'd replaced the Ivans logistics contract with 3 smaller clients. More diversified, more stable. Daniel got a promotion. I hired 4 new employees. We moved to a bigger office with views of the harbor. I reconnected with Uncle Robert. We had dinner once a month. He told me stories about my mother, the real ones, not the sanitized versions my father had fed me. She'd been fierce, apparently. Stubborn. Fighter. You're just like her, Robert said. She'd be so proud of you. I still kept the photo of Grandma Margaret on my desk. I visited her grave every month, left flowers and told her about my life. Felt strange talking to a headstone but also healing. I did it, Grandma, I told her one spring morning. I didn't let them define me. The wind rustled through the cemetery trees. If I listened closely, I could almost hear her voice. I knew you would, sweetheart. I always knew. So here's what I learned. If you want the moral of this story, your worth is not determined by a degree. It's not determined by your family's opinion. It's not determined by who believes in you or who tries to tear you down. Your worth is determined by what you build when no one is watching, by who you become when everyone counts you out, and by the life you create with your own 2 hands. My father thought he was teaching me a lesson at that retirement party. He thought he was putting me in my place. What he actually did was set me free. I don't hate my family. That's the part people struggle to understand. Hate takes energy. Hate is a chain. I'd rather spend that energy on people who deserve it, on work I believe in, on relationships that nourish me, and on a life that's truly mine. Boundaries aren't about revenge. They're about protection. They're about saying, this is where my life begins and your damage ends. If you're in a family that makes you feel small, if you have people in your life who see your potential as a threat instead of a gift, if you've ever been the family disappointment, the scapegoat, or the invisible one, I see you. Been you. And I promise you there is life on the other side of walking away. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being here. If this resonated with you, please subscribe, hit the notification bell, check the description for more stories like this one, and remember, you are not what they said you were. You never were. You are so much more. Until next time, this is Heather, and I'm finally free.